Hi everyone, my name is Nick and today we are going to take a look at Excel and one of the most easiest to perform lookup functions. So I hear a lot of the time people having issues with VLOOKUPs not working or HLOOKUPs or index match, but instead actually, Microsoft actually came out with a very simple lookup function that only really requires 3 parts rather than 4, right? So super easy, and I'm going to demonstrate that for you. If you find this video useful, you know what to do. And with that said, let's jump on over to Microsoft Excel. Okay, so here we are just in Excel, and I've got a couple of things here. So this is a dummy data set, and we have a list of SKUs, some item codes and item descriptions here with cost prices. Then we've got a warehouse location that has stock, and then we've got location 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and there's various different levels of stock in each location. And what we want to do is basically in this example sheet, I just have the product code and the item description. And what I'd like to do is actually have a summary of the total values and the individual stock levels, okay, for every location 1 through 4. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to just give these a couple of headers here, so location 1, and I'm just going to use the autofill here to automatically fill that to 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then I'm just going to expand these out. Okay, so normally what people would do is they'd come in here and they'd actually go and open up a VLOOKUP, okay, like this, and they would be looking for the lookup value and where they're going to find it. Now they would come here, they would do the entire set like this, and then they'll count how many columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so location 1 is on 5, and then they're going to say they want it to be an exact match, which would be the word of false, or 0, depending on what you prefer. And then that's going to get you the, or basically that's going to pull in the result of 5, right? And we can check that that is correct. We go over to here, we can see the SKU code of 558, and location 1 should be 9, right? And we have 9 here, okay? So straight away we know that that is working. However, that requires 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts, 4 parts, okay? And it requires you to count the number of columns. It's a little bit clunky. I mean, we're in the year 2020. We shouldn't be using things that were around in the noughties, right? You know, things move on, and this particular formula is well out of date now. So instead of doing that, what I'm going to do for location 2 here is use a new function called the XLOOKUP. It only requires a few parts and it's very, very simple. So instead, we're going to go equals XLOOKUP, if you spell it right. Okay, and it's got main part here is the lookup value. So we're going to click on the SKU, hit comma, and then we want the lookup array, and the array is basically only a single column in this particular case. Okay, basically it works very much like a match function, and then it wraps it in the index at the end. So yeah, just bear with me. Single column of where that value, that lookup value, will be found. Okay, that's column A in this example. The next part is the return array. What do I want? I want location 2. And I can just close that, and there we go. Okay, so instead we have 1 part, 2 parts, 3 parts, versus a VLOOKUP of 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so it's dropped apart altogether, and it's very simple. What we have here is what we want to find, where we're going to find it, and then what we would like to return off that row. Okay. And the thing with the XLOOKUP is it works both ways. So if you wanted to go horizontal, you can still do that with an XLOOKUP, but you couldn't do it with a VLOOKUP. You'd have to use a HLOOKUP. So an XLOOKUP is basically a combination of a VLOOKUP and a HLOOKUP combined. I mean, it's very, very powerful. You can go in almost any direction you would like. And the other thing to bear in mind here, for anyone who's familiar with using VLOOKUPs, is if I take this SKU code and insert it over here, wait for the data to catch up. Right now, if I wanted to bring back the item code, the item description based off of this code, a VLOOKUP would fail. Okay, so I'm going to show you what that looks like. And you'll notice now that this has failed. Okay, this has failed because it can't find this in column A anymore. Okay, but the XLOOKUP has dynamically worked for us. It knows that we moved column A and it's now in column B. Okay, but in this example, I'll just give you that item description again, just in this column here. Okay, so if I go for a VLOOKUP, I go equals VLOOKUP. This is a very common mistake that people make with the VLOOKUP. And they'll look for this code, okay, and they'll come over here and they'll do this. And then they'll realize, how do I get to this? It's outside of the scope. Okay, so I can't count negative numbers because it will fall outside of the table array. Okay, so basically you could never pull back the item description because it's to the left of your lookup value. Okay, so VLOOKUP doesn't work, but that's where XLOOKUP would. So if I go equals XLOOKUP and choose the item code here, and I come over to my raw data again, I can now select column B because that's where the value is going to be found, and then I can bring back column A, press return, and there's the description. So the XLOOKUP doesn't really care whether the return result is to the left or the right of the lookup value. It can be in either direction, and it's something incredibly powerful to use. I do recommend that people start using the XLOOKUP over something like the VLOOKUP, because the VLOOKUP is very difficult to use in this day and age with data sets that are so much larger, and sometimes your lookup values are not always going to be in the very first column, which is obviously a requirement of the VLOOKUP. Okay, so strongly recommend you use the XLOOKUP. Okay, much better. Now the other thing you can do is obviously use a match and index, but it's quite lengthy in comparison to the XLOOKUP, and it does pretty much the same thing. The only difference really between the index match is that you can add multiple criteria into a match formula, so you can actually then start filtering your data sets a lot more efficiently than from an XLOOKUP. But for most lookup functions, an XLOOKUP would be fine. But if I just show you what a match would look like, you basically, match is basically three types again. So the lookup value is the SKU code. Where's the SKU code going to be found? It's going to be found in column B, and it has to be an exact match, which would be a 0, and press close on that, just press return. Right now we can see it's on row 2, and then what you do is actually just index the column that you'd like to bring back. So in this case, I'm in location 3 here, just put a comma on that and then just close off the parentheses at the end there, and then you end up with this. Now that's quite a long-winded way to get to the same result as what an XLOOKUP is doing. Okay, so if you're just going to do something basic like that, an XLOOKUP is much more efficient than a index match formula. The index match formula, however, would be better if you were going to be dynamic about your column choosing. So you could then do a lookup against the column header and find what column number it was going to be in. So again, that's how you would kind of make VLOOKUPs or index match formulas more dynamic in their approach. But for the most part, an XLOOKUP will do most lookups that you're going to require. Okay, now we only really covered the three main parts of this XLOOKUP, right? So we have the lookup value, we have the location where that value will be found, and then we have the return column, right? Now there are 3 additional parts to this that are optional. You don't have to use them, but if you do use them, it makes the XLOOKUP even more powerful. Okay, so if I just hit comma at the end of this one, we open up this next section, which is if not found. So if your lookup value cannot be found in your lookup array, then what do you want the formula to do? If you don't use this part of the formula, you'll just get the NA issue. Okay, so basically it'll just say can't be found, you get the error NA. Okay, if however you want to return, let's say, every error as a 0, you just put a 0 in that part there. And what that'll do is every time it comes across something that can't be found, it then just returns 0 instead of NA, okay? And a lot of people used to wrap their VLOOKUPs inside an if-error formula. So you'd have if error, then your VLOOKUP, right? And that works, it's great, but you're basically then having to merge multiple different formulas together. It's a little bit clunky. If you're very switched on with how to do your VLOOKUPs and you're used to wrapping it in if errors, fine, you know, but basically this XLOOKUP handles it for you all within a single formula. So very, very good stuff. Now, if I hit comma again, there is now something called match mode. And match mode lets you take your lookup function a little bit further, right? So by default, it's always going to be looking for an exact match. But if it's a numeric value like we have here, we could go for an exact match or the next smallest number, or an exact match and the next largest number. Or if we really wanted to, we could go for a wildcard match as well. So if you're matching on text and you only have like a first name, you could put a wildcard in and always find someone's surname within that wildcard scenario. So that's actually a really useful function. But I'm just going to hit 0 because I want an exact match for now. But do mess around and actually play with some of these different settings, because under different circumstances, this one formula actually solves a lot of real-world problems. Okay, and the very last optional part, so part 6 of the formula, basically then lets you search the list in a host of different ways, right? So by default, it will always search from the top of a list down to the bottom of the list. But you could also flip that and actually search from the bottom of the list up to the top of the list. Okay, so depending on how your data set is sorted, you can do your searches in that sense as well. Then there's also the ability to search in a binary way. So you can search ascending order in a binary or a descending order in binary search. So if you're talking about numerical values, then ultimately, you know, you might think actually a binary way is a really good way of doing it. If you're thinking about trying to match on dates, then sorting it by date order and basically doing a binary search that way, then actually, you know, your one function has basically solved out any potential issues of returning the wrong value if you have multiple of the same lookup values in your data set, right? So in my example, I don't have that, but if you do, then you know you might want to actually do this this sixth part of the formula where you can dictate how the formula finds the results that you're looking for. So again, very, very useful stuff that this XLOOKUP can do for you. So well worth checking it out. I thought I would actually just kind of do this video because it came up a little bit whilst at my day job, where people were using the VLOOKUP, and I'm a strong believer that that thing just needs to be, you know, taken out of Excel now, because it's so not needed in this world where we live in, where things need to be a lot more efficient in how they work. The VLOOKUP is, whereas it's done a fantastic job for years, sometimes you just have to put these things, you know, out and let them go and move on. And I'm a believer that the VLOOKUP has had its day, and the XLOOKUP is here to stay. So again, if you found this video useful, then you know what to do. And with all that said, I will catch you guys in the next video.